you probably have a story. Or you know someone who has a story. The dog that wouldn't leave the room, the cat that appeared at the bedside and stayed there for days before the end, the horse that stopped eating, the bird that flew into the window on the morning of the death. People collect these stories the way they collect evidence of things they cannot fully explain, and they hold them with a specific kind of careful certainty, the certainty of someone who was there, saw it, and cannot be argued out of what they witnessed. What almost nobody asks is what is actually happening. Not whether the story is true, but what the mechanism is, what the animal is perceiving, whether it knows, in any meaningful sense of that word, what is coming, whether the distinction between detecting and knowing matters as much as we assume it does. Let's start with what we can establish, because the answer is more grounded in biology than the mythology around it suggests. Animals detect things. This is their primary function as living systems. They are built to perceive their environment in ways that are calibrated to the specific survival pressures of their species. That means they often perceive things that humans cannot perceive as readily, or cannot perceive without instruments. A dog's sense of smell is estimated to be between 10,000 and 100,000 times more sensitive than a human's, depending on what is being measured and which breed is being studied. A dog experiences the world primarily as a landscape of chemical information that humans are almost entirely unable to access. What this means in practice is that a dog in a room with a dying person is receiving information about that person's physical state that the other humans in the room cannot receive at all. The question is what that information contains and what the dog does with it. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting. When the human body moves toward death, it changes. Not suddenly and not all at once, but measurably and in ways that produce detectable signals. Metabolic processes alter. The chemical composition of breath changes. Skin chemistry shifts. The microbiome, the community of bacteria that lives on and in the body, begins to change in response to changes in organ function. These are not subtle shifts that require laboratory equipment to detect. They are significant biochemical events that produce real chemical signals. Signals that a dog or a cat, with sensory systems calibrated to detect exactly this kind of chemical information, would receive clearly and interpret as something different from normal. Something changed. Something is wrong. Something here is not what it was. The animal is not predicting death. It is detecting a present physical state. The distinction is important and is also ultimately somewhat academic. If an animal detects the specific biochemical signature of a body that is shutting down and responds by staying close, staying alert, and changing its behavior in ways that communicate something to the humans watching, the practical difference between detecting and knowing is difficult to maintain. Oscar is the most documented example of this phenomenon in a controlled clinical setting, and he is worth examining in some detail because his case has been formally written about in a peer-reviewed medical journal, which is not something that happens often with accounts of animals appearing to anticipate death. Oscar is a cat who lived in a dementia care unit in Providence. He was observed over years to reliably visit the rooms of patients who were within hours of death, not patients who were simply ill, specifically patients who were in the final hours of life. He would arrive, curl up near the patient, and remain there until death occurred. Then he would leave. The nursing staff began contacting families when Oscar settled in a room because his presence had proven more reliable than most clinical measures available to them. His accuracy across more than 50 documented cases was consistent enough that the staff treated it as genuinely meaningful information. Dr. David Dosa, a geriatrician at the unit, wrote about Oscar in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2007. The paper was not a claim about animal cognition or animal emotion. It was a careful clinical observation that this animal was consistently detecting something that corresponded with imminent death and behaving in response to it. The proposed mechanism was biochemical. Dying cells release specific compounds called ketones. The body in the final stages of organ failure produces a distinct chemical signature that is different from the chemical signature of illness, sleep, or ordinary human activity. A cat with a highly developed sense of smell would detect this signature. Whether Oscar understood what the signature meant in any conceptual sense is a question that cannot be answered. What can be said is that he responded to it consistently and specifically in a way that turned out to be clinically useful. Dogs have been trained in controlled settings to detect cancer, low blood sugar in diabetics, and the onset of epileptic seizures. In each case, the training works by exploiting an existing animal capacity, the ability to detect biochemical signals, and teaching the animal to communicate when it detects them. The capacity was already there. The training simply makes the signal legible to the humans who cannot detect it themselves. What this tells us is that the animal perception involved in cases like Oscar is not mysterious in its mechanism. It is the ordinary functioning of an extraordinary sensory system pointed at a target that produces extraordinary chemical information. What is less straightforward is the behavioral response. Oscar did not simply detect dying patients. He chose to go to them, to stay. This is behavior that requires an explanation beyond pure detection. A smoke detector detects smoke. It does not choose to sit next to the fire. Oscar's behavior implies something more than signal reception. It implies a response pattern, a learned or innate association between a specific sensory input and a specific behavioral output that produces what looks, from the outside, like presence, like companionship, like care. Whether it is care is a question that depends entirely on what you mean by the word. If care requires conscious awareness of what you are doing and why, the evidence for Oscar experiencing that is unavailable. If care means choosing to be near something rather than away from it, then the behavior is care, regardless of its mechanism. The dying patients in that unit were not alone when Oscar arrived. Whatever the reason he came, he came. He stayed. He was there when the thing happened. Animals across species show behavior that corresponds with the deaths of companions and family members in ways that are difficult to dismiss as simple confusion or random behavior. Elephants return to the bones of dead family members years after death, touch them carefully with their trunks, and stand over them in ways that observers have struggled to describe without using the word mourning. Whether they experience something analogous to grief is debated among animal cognition researchers with enough seriousness to suggest it is not a trivially foolish question. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days after death, grooming them and protecting them. Crows gather around the bodies of dead crows in behaviors researchers have called death rituals, though the term is contested, and study the body in ways that suggest they are extracting information about how the crow died and what threat might have produced it. The information processing is different in each case. But the attention to death, the recognition that something significant has changed or is changing, appears across many species and at levels of complexity that resist simple explanation. The honest position on whether animals know when a human is about to die is this: they detect things that we cannot detect, using sensory systems that are calibrated in ways ours are not. They respond to those detections in ways that are behaviorally real and measurable, and, in documented clinical cases, practically meaningful to the people around them. Whether they know, in the richer sense of understanding what death is, what it means, or what its permanence implies, remains an open question. It will remain an open question for as long as we cannot access subjective animal experience directly, which may be a very long time. What is not open is the evidence that something is happening, that the animal in the room is receiving information, that it is responding to that information in specific ways, that those ways sometimes correspond closely enough with the actual approach of death to be useful, comforting, or at minimum worth taking seriously. The dog that stayed, the cat that came, the stories people carry and hold carefully because they were there and they saw it. They are not nothing. They are observations of a real phenomenon that science is slowly building the vocabulary to describe. The mechanism is biochemistry. The result, in that room, at that moment, feels like something considerably more than that. Both of these things are true. They are not in conflict. The animal came because it detected something. It stayed because that is what it did. The person was not alone.